So events for this year, I think my core one is craft and commerce for this year. I talked to you about this. I want to try and get to that because I think there's a lot of people in our area going to that. It seems to be growing really nicely. I really like the ConvertKit team. The stuff that we've done with them, the fact I've used the tool for like better part of a decade. And it seems like the talks and stuff that it's a smaller event. I'm really keen. I'm much more keen to go to events where the participants are in the low hundreds as opposed to thousands. And so that's kind of my goal for this year is to go only to small events because I just don't, the last few years, I've gone to some of the bigger events and I just don't get half as much out of them because you just don't, they're not as intimate. You don't meet as many people. Weirdly, like I find you meet way more people at small events because you end up bumping into the same people much more often. That's the thing.
100%.
So yeah, so that's a big one for me. What about you? You got any other goals?
Events wise,
Yep.
yeah, I'd really like to go to Craft and Commerce as well. I've never been, and similar, exact same reasons really. We talked about this last year, but it's got, I mean, the speakers are exactly the kind of people that I'd want to hear from. Do you know what I mean? I'd want to listen to, and yeah, if that kind of low hundreds event is fantastic. There's an event that you have went to frequently over the years that I've went to a few times called Atomicon in
Yeah.
Castle.
Yep.
That's one of the best events I've ever been to. Because it is low hundreds, and you get to actually really know people, and it's exactly that. It's the same as the difference between a small city, a big city and a small town. You know, everyone is in a rush to get everywhere because the venue is bigger. It takes longer to get from talk to talk.
Yeah.
And it's all just kind of sardined in, and you don't really get much of a chance to have conversations without having to run off here and there. And yeah, so I'm quite attracted to that as well. I always had an idea in my head that I wanted to go to Inbound, and I can't say that I'm particularly, don't know if I really want to, because it's going to be, I mean, it's the big events of all big events for marketing creators, isn't it? So it is just going to be super hectic, and I feel like some of the experiences that we've had I mean, as much as I like it, the podcast show in London, which we've been to a few times, it is a bigger event, and it does have that feeling of hectic running from room to room. And I feel like Inbound would be that, but like 10 times worse. I think you've been to Inbound, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been
A few
twice.
times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if is it still what it once was, or?
I'm not sure. I'm totally out of the loop of that area actually, which makes me feel it probably isn't because I'm definitely not out of the loop of that community, that group of people potentially. So the fact that I've not heard half as much about it the last few years, maybe that's a sign that it isn't as popular as it was. But that was my experience. It's a festival. It's like going to like a music festival than a conference. So it's an experience. It is worth going to at least once, I think. Well, presuming it's still good, and it was great fun. And Boston's such a cool city. But I don't think I learned a lot from it. It's certainly not, maybe that's not fair. There's some really good speakers there. And because it's a big name, people tend to put a fair bit of work into their talk. So if you do put the work into picking out good, relevant talks, which is the hard part because there's so many, you probably could learn a fair bit there. But you certainly don't meet as many people, or my experience was I struggled to meet people there because it was so big and you just didn't bump into folk half as much. So yeah, that was my experience, certainly. But you're right. Yeah, the two British ones. Yeah, so we've got Atomicon, definitely going to that. So great marketing, business, growth event here in the UK, and Adventures in Marketing as well, which is only 3-4 weeks away, which is in Edinburgh. So that's a much smaller one. That's 100 to 150 people or so. Really looking forward to that actually, just for that exact reason. The fact that it's one of those events that this is the third year. I've been to the last two, and so it's because it's small, I'm bumping into the same people again and again and get to know much more people. So yeah, that's really
you start to get that sort of family feeling, which is what I really like about Atomicon. I've not been there long enough to really have that.
Yeah.
Myself, but like you can just be in that environment where it does feel like a big family that gets together once a year, that kind of thing. That's a really special thing in an event. Yeah.
And there's tons of those. Like obviously we're UK based, but you out there listening might be US, And there's tons of these kinds of events in the US, certainly. Like I've been to a fair few smaller ones. Podcasting, for example, Podfest, I've been to a couple of times. Great event on the smaller scale. It's definitely not in the low hundreds, but it's definitely on a more community scale side. I'm sorry to miss that this year, actually. I almost made a last minute decision to go last month, just because it's the most relevant to our business, obviously, but I just couldn't make it work. And then the podcast show as well. I think the podcast show is the only podcast specific one I'm going to go to this year.
Yeah, podcast show's good. Good. I mean, really, really good. You went to a big one last year, didn't you? You went to South by Southwest.
Yeah, that's
an investment for people. Would you recommend people go to that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that I get is similar to Inbound. It's an experience. And there were some really high level talks at it, but it was so hard to find anything relevant to that. Like that had 40, 50 different things on in parallel at any given time. So it was either you put the work, I actually sat down for nearly an entire day to try and go through the program and find things ahead of time. But there was so much choice, like you got decision fatigue really quick. And it was just, I found it more stressful than anything else. But certainly, yeah, if you put the work in and you did make those decisions, you would get some great talks there. I went to some great things. There was certainly a really good nightlife at it. It's more a party than anything else. But as a pure work thing, and the fact that it's particularly expensive because of all the things you get, like the music, the film, the parties, all that kind of stuff, it's very expensive. I know a lot of people go to Austin during South by Southwest week and just enjoy the atmosphere
around it
and meeting people and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's a way to do it.
Yeah,
You can probably wangle your way into some of the parties.
Yeah, definitely. Enough charisma, you'll get in.
Well, do you know what? There's a lot there's official South by Southwest parties, but there's also a whole kind of sideline of people just running events. So there's all these. I found a list, for example. I was sent a list of startup entrepreneur related events that were running during South by Southwest week, and none of them required a ticket. They were all just being run on the side, and so there's absolutely shed loads of things you could go to for sure. Yeah,
that's a brilliant point, because you're not getting that any other place or time of year, are you?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what is it, like 20, 30 more thousand people?
Yeah, something like that in that region.
In that town at that time. Yeah, so it would be a good idea to go there. Yeah, that's cool.
The only other thing I've been thinking about, I would like to get to an event around video somehow this year. So there's a couple in the UK run by a guy called Matt. Second name escapes me right now. But I'll put it in the description for the actual event. But he runs a video event twice a year in the UK, and I want to try and get to that. Last year, the first one was on the same week as the podcast show, so I couldn't go to it then. And the second one was in November, December, and it was just really tricky to get to. But this year, I want to get along to that event because I think he's building something really interesting there, actually. It's a low numbers event, just purely based around YouTube. But there's a lot of podcasters going to it as well. Obviously, it's really relevant to us too. So I want to try and get to that. But equally...
What's the name again?
What? I don't know.
Let
me search. So I wonder if I can find it quickly. But I want to try and get along to that just because of how it does look really good. But there's one in the US as well called VidCon. Have you heard of VidCon?
Yeah, I've heard of VidCon, yeah. And heard of VidCon and TubeFest. Those are the two I've heard of.
TubeFest might actually be the one that I'm thinking of. Let me have a quick look. Yeah, that's the one. That's exactly it. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's on in Birmingham. So next one's in Birmingham in April. So yeah, I think one of us at least should get along to that if we can. So yeah, we'll revisit that. But I'd love to get along and get a bit more kind of contact in the YouTube space. That would be a goal for this year.